Greetings and simultaneous salutations. The afternoon session is now beginning. We're going to start with a couple of my favorite people in the entire world. The Odoricios and I go back about to the time when Noah was growing the wood for the ark. That's how long we've been working together and have been friends. The Odoricios are the godfather for my children and godmother for my children, and some of the best friends you could ever ask. They're also experts in this disease. They run the cancer program at the University of Iowa. They are the first person that I know of, and correct me if I'm wrong, to get a multi-million-dollar grant from the federal government to study neuroendocrine tumors called a SPORE grant. And it's out on the backdrop of the University of Iowa, the Holden Cancer Center. They've been gracious enough to come and speak today. Dr. Tom Odoricio is going to talk about PRRT trials in America, where are we now? And then Sue Odoricio is going to talk about 90 yttrium dotatok PRRT and gallium-68 PET scans.
Thank you very much, Gene. So Sue and I have designed a little program. I retitled it a little bit for the ABCs of PRRT. It's not meant, hopefully it's meant to show the very minimum differences between what we talk about loosely as PRRT, or is it dotatok, or I'm sorry, dotatok or dotatate, so that you have an appreciation of that. Then I'm going to finish my part with the study that has been submitted for a third time to New England Journal, probably will get published there, we believe. Jonathan Strasberg gave me his set of slides for the Lutathera, and there's a few points that can be made on this is the one that hopefully will go to registration by the FDA by the end of December or January at the latest for approval in the United States. And then Sue will show her work and our work with the Y90, making all the while the case for the need for both lutetium Lu-177 and Y90 in the United States. If I can just get that first slide. Oops. Can I get this on the screen here? It would be helpful. You got to point it at the guys in the back. Oh. It's the screen on here. I'm sorry. I'm going through my talk and I haven't said anything. Let's see. I just can't get my screen on, Gene. It'd be a little better. Hit it again? That's on, but I mean the... Pardon me? Thank you. There we go. Good, perfect. Thank you. Okay, this is the first slide. This is an algorithm, if you will. Everybody has one type of algorithm or another for the therapies. These represent all the therapies that are broadly available as you work through years and years of this beast. And the one thing I want to show on it is the way we feel at the University of Iowa. We feel that the predominant therapies are surgery, followed by PRRT. Obviously, that's a straight line. It's not a dotted line. It's a solid line. We believe that that's where the paradigm is going to shift in the future. Right now, we're in the process of getting caught up, if you will, with the European people, and I think by the end of the day, you'll see that we're just actually there with studies that are formalizing the early work from Europe. We're quite happy. We do think we've caught up with Europe for PRRT. This part of the paradigm will not happen for a few years until they become clinically available, namely Lu-177 and Y90. But we believe strongly that that's where the paradigm is, and not at the at the current time where PRRT becomes for metastatic progressive disease failing on octreotide or not failing on octreotide, which is what we have at the present time. PRRT, I put the N in honor of Richard Baum, who created PRRNT, but it stands for peptide receptor radionuclide therapy. So the peptide, I think of it as a key, is either octreotide or octreotate. And the receptor is the receptor, somatostatin receptor subtype 2A. Really, it's the one piece of the lock, if you will, on the membrane of the tumor, which it dangles outside and which is bound, specifically binds the synthetic peptide octreotide or octreotate. The radionuclide that we use clinically now are two beta molecules. One is Y90, the harder beta, and the one that's going to be commercially available soon is lutetium-177. We had many years of experience with the Y90 before the lutetium, and that's what we have retained and Sue has retained at the university. So this is the key that we use at the University of Iowa, and I'll show you the structures in a moment, but that's DOTA-TOC. DOTA is the cage that holds either the gallium for diagnosis or holds the yttrium or holds the lutetium. It's made together with the key itself, the key being tyrosinated octreotide called TOC, or TATE, which I'm not quite sure what those abbreviations are. We think it's tyrosinated, amidated threonine, but we're not sure. It's just called TATE. But you'll see how very, very closely alike they look to octreotide. The bottom shows you the radio metals that you can add. When you add gallium-68, you get a beautiful positron emission tomography. When you add yttrium-90, you get a very hard beta energy that travels about not quite 7 to 9 millimeters, much shorter. You'll hear that from Sue. And the lutetium-111. Lutetium-177, which travels even in a shorter distance. But those are the two radioactive materials, and our hope is that we will, in the United States, have the availability for both, and the reasons that Dr. Sue will show you. Now, you got the key, now you have to see the lock, and this is the lock right here. On the left, you can all see a very nice tissue there. That's liver tissue. On the right, that's all tumor tissue. And that stain is very, very specific. It's one that Dr. Sue and I developed against that receptor 2, called somatostatin receptor subtype 2. And those cells are almost 100% containing the receptors. And that's a stain for it, and you can't see it up, but on a high powered you can see rims around the cell itself, which is on the membrane, and inside you can even see the staining, which is the cytoplasmic component, because this receptor, when the key attaches, when octreotide attaches, when labeled octreotide attaches, or labeled TOC or TATE attaches to it, it internalizes inside the cell. So we saw the key that we use, or the peptide, if you will. These are the membrane receptors and how they look. And this is the model that we wanted to credit Helmut Mackey, who developed the compound, who put the linker on the key so that you can contain a radio metal. You can attach a radio metal to the back end of the key, or an arrow, and you can see it fairly broken down. Here's the cage on the right side, and that corresponds to the key here with the rounded circle, and the linker is all part of the same structure. That's called DOTA, and when you put something inside of it, then it's either gallium, lutetium, or yttrium, and then the receptors are attached to the tumor itself. And I think that should move a little. Maybe it doesn't. Let's see if it does. Pardon me. Oh, hold it up. Yep, there we go. And there it is. It's kind of dramatic there. Waited for a minute. It always leaves me short of breath. I had to work it. It goes here. But that's the mechanism. It doesn't get better, sweeter than that, simple as that. And it attaches, and once that happens, you have attachment to the membrane and then internalization in the case of somatostatin receptor subtype 2, where it's taken inside the cell. Keep in mind that cell itself becomes a source for kill beyond itself. The cell itself is not killed because the energy is pinpointed away from it. We'll show you that in a moment. I'll point this up again. And you can just put the different things inside the cell, lutetium, gallium, or yttrium. And there's the yttrium, and you can see. Now, the advised a bit against this one, it's not what I wanted to show you to make a point, and you can see it, I hope they replay this, but really the way how good do the keys attach and detach from the membrane determines the quality of the peptide. In the case of TOC, tyrosinated octreotide, that we'll see in a moment, and in the case of TATE, they both attach very nicely to receptor 2. Here's 2 on the far left. And those numbers, the lower the number, the better the affinity to the receptor, and the better the ability actually to be displaced, to be knocked off the receptor. That's what determines a high affinity receptor for, if you will, a lock for its key. And I put all of the ones that are really available to us, including indium octreotide, which is the octreoscan. I have the gallium octreotoc, gallium toc, and I have the gallium tate. But you can see those numbers are really rather under 10. One's a little higher, but under 10 means they're very good affinity for that receptor. So that key fits into the lock very nicely versus the other receptors for somatostatin. So you know that those are the ones, and the ones particularly that are available clinically to all of us are going to be gallium DOTA-TOC, gallium DOTA-TATE, lutetium DOTA-TATE, and yttrium DOTA-TOC. Now here's the indium pentatreotide, which is identical to the octreotide on your left side. But it's, and that's octreotide. As you can see, that red on the top is an amino acid. We heard about tryptophan, and this is what makes up these peptides. Pardon me. Sorry. This is what makes up these peptides in a ringed fashion. The ring must be maintained. That is a circular configuration of the original hormone. Somatostatin has that ring, and in that ring is where the key, the main part of the key fits into the receptor. And you'll see this lysine right here in the same position. And that's where that key locks into receptor subtype 2. And as you can see, the case of indium, which we have is a form of octreoscan, the cage is a little bit different on the top to hold the indium. And there's your gallium DOTA-TOC, which is the tyrosinated form of octreotide. That's virtually octreotide, except it's got one amino acid exchange, and there's the cage that we use. So that's a slight difference with the octreoscan versus the PET scan that we're using now, giving us much more sensitivity with the gallium, as we heard. And this is just one example let me get another one for you there. The one of a gallium the specificity of a gallium in helping to find a primary, which is one of the more sensitive, one of the better rationales for using the gallium over the octreoscan. Octreoscan in its best dress has about a 12 millimeter detection sensitivity, whereas gallium can get down to 4 to 5 millimeters. In the case of this metastatic tumor, we didn't know the primary, and we did the gallium, and in fact, you can see the arrows there, and the arrow shows the pancreatic. You can see it better than that arrow showing it right there. There's a pancreatic tumor in the body of the pancreas. So this is now the Y90 itself. This is Y90 DOTA-TOC. This is what Dr. Su will show our work with. This is the form that first came out in Basel, Switzerland, and it was used for several years before the lutetium was used in place of the yttrium. But as you can see, the molecule, again, is octreotide, except it's got the only thing different, what did I do, is that it has that tyrosine up above, but it's identical to octreotide. And the Y90 has an energy that kills it 5 millimeters away from itself. The more receptors you have on the cell, on the tumors, the more crossfire there is amongst that homogeneous or heterogeneous population of cells, and that's how the local energy works. So it's very dependent on the number of receptors, if you will, number of locks, if you will, and the binding. So just to show you that complex of yttrium attaching to the cage does not come off, which was always a concern. It's virtually, I use the word annealed, but it's very tightly bound to the modified octreotide. And this is the DOTA-TOC on the top and the DOTA-TATE below it, just to give you an idea of the structures. And on top you can see the tyrosinated form of octreotide, and below you can see the tyrosinated form of octreotide. DOTA-TATE is almost identical to TOC, except for one little amino acid at the bottom here, where when they made it, quote, Eric Krenning said the rear end of the TOC fell off. And because of that, we lost the 3-anenolol, which is that OL there. But you can see how strikingly close they are to each other. And notice the lysine, that part of the key that locks into the membrane, is still retained in both forms. So those are the two compounds. The 177 TATE, it will be hopefully registered in the United States under the Netter Lutathera trial that was completed. I'm going to show you a few slides of that and then step away. And this is just an example that, again, many people say, how is it given? It's given in your vein peripherally. The other point I wish to make about this is that they use a renal protectant for both the lutetium therapy and the yttrium therapy. They start an amino acid, they start some proteins in your vein, amino acids, for a half an hour, and then they inject for 10 to 15 minutes either yttrium, DOTA-TOC, or lutetium-177, DOTA-TATE. It starts to travel in the vein to the higher expressed receptors or locks of the cell. It is then internalized and gives off an explosion. And again, another way to look at it is it goes in and make a point, it's in all directions. But notice it's away from its source. So a source away from the cell that had a source for another cell is in the line of fire from the other cell. It does not travel through and kill everything in front of it. It kills at a point of its maximum penetration. And that's why they have used that's why they say the lutetium-177 may be better for smaller neuroendocrine cells, and that the yttrium-90 may be better for the larger neuroendocrine cells. Dr. Su will show you our evidence that the combination is better than either alone. And then, according, there's shrinkage of the cells after that, and that is how it works. The perfusion is what causes all the problem for the renal protectant, because the rate of the flow of these amino acids were not built for, and so there's often nausea, emesis, and generalized just feeling terrible with for the infusion, but they adjust the rate and they give very good antiemetics now, which helps prevent it. The single biggest thing you can do when you go to get this therapy is hydrate yourself for 24 hours before you have it. And that's especially true the day you get it, because that's a dehydrating type of fluid that you're given. What it does is take up the parking spots along the street with amino acids in the kidney tubules, so that the reuptake of either TOC or TATE can't get back into the kidney and cause issues. This is the Netter study. This is the preliminary work kindly provided by Dr. John Strasberg. Jonathan Strasberg is the first author on it. It was a 48-center study from both Europe and the United States, roughly 100 people for two different groups of the trial. Two different arms were used. One group received 60 milligrams of octreotide LAR a month. The other group was randomized. This was a randomization study. They said 1-to-1. And the other group received 4 cycles of lutetium-177 over a period of 6 to 8 weeks apart. This is a study objective and design. I really show you this slide because this is a medical oncologist view of a slide. I can't read any of it, and I just wanted to show it to you, but that's the study objectives and designs. You notice how it pulls away significantly from the other better looking slides, but I think they do. But you can see that they had 115 patients in both arms. It was randomized very well, I think, because the characteristics of the populations were identical, age matched. They were matched by the grade. They used the Octrea scan to determine eligibility. They had grade 2, 3, and 4. The vast majority in both groups were grade 4 on the Krenning scale. That meant that the tumor was very dense with receptors when compared to the liver background at 24 hours. That's the point that they use to make the Krenning grade 1, 2, 3, and 4. But the vast majority were 4, and we think they were put equally in both groups. And this is really the results of what they have. But the bottom line is, you can see the lower line, and that is apparently the octreotide, 60 milligrams in that group. And you can see that let me just read a little bit here. Survival probability is the word they use. You can see drops down where they had about an 8-month median time to progression with the octreotide against the lutetium cycle therapy. And they talk about the estimated median progressive-free survival in the Lutathera arm is about 40 months. So that and that's at a 30-month stop point. So it's a very you can see that it's a very impressive information against the maximum. I think they did the right thing with 60 milligrams of LAR, which has been shown to extend progression-free survival on average of 24 to 28 months in the Clarinet study. And against that, using the lutetium 4 cycles, you can see a clear difference in the median time to progression. I like median time to progression versus progression-free survival, which are virtually the same thing. Their conclusion, in terms of adverse effects, I'm sorry, they had a very high percent of nausea and emesis, and that was during the infusion of the amino acid to protect the kidney. In fact, most of the adverse effects were the result of the infusion of the protein. So when you ask what the side effects are, it's actually part of the treatment to be renal protective, and that's where really the issues come. But there was some drug-related side effects. The ones we look carefully at are the myelosuppression. It was almost 10% where they got thrombocytopenia, low platelets, neutropenia, low granulocyte white blood cells, and low lymphocyte white blood cells. So those, and they were one patient had myelodysplastic syndrome, and that can be a problem. There's been a lot of work on that. Dr. Su can talk to that, but that can be a very big problem when you're talking about treatments, more and more treatments, and what you've had prior to the PRRT, because that may predispose you to having this kind of total blood marrow suppression, and that can be serious. Right now, they said 10% for different components of the blood cells being suppressed, recovering, except for one patient treated out of 100. I think 100 was the final ones they used, 100 or 101 folks that were treated completely. So that's one thing that was caused by the drug itself. And of course, the renal toxicity, they had no nephrotoxicity in this study. We feel good about that as well. And I think you'll see the extra precaution that we're taking, Dr. Su's taking at the University of Iowa to further avoid kidney toxicity. But I think the point to be remembered is that both lutetium and yttrium can cause nephro effects, even though they say less for the lutetium. If you look at the studies and consciously go through them, those effects can be about the same if not guarded well, and even sometimes if guarded well. So that's why I just showed this slide, to make the point about the adverse effects with this, and it's almost all related to the infusion of the amino acids to protect the kidney. And let me just, oops, here we go there. In summary then, they show that the progression-free survival, or time to progression, was not reached as yet with the lutetium-treated group, and they're highly significant against the octreotide LAR 60 milligrams per month, which was 8.4 months. Overall response rate was 18% with the lutetium versus 3% in their analysis with the octreotide LAR. So in their conclusions, they are saying, and that's what the FDA is now looking at, the safety profile, and the outcome. Even though it's an interim analysis, the study is supposed to go for 5 years, and that's I think has a very good chance of being approved. AAA has also done an enormous service by allowing us to use the expanded access program to get the lutetium therapy free until it's approved in the United States for patients with midgut tumors. This study was predicated on the midgut small bowel tumors. It was all done for the midguts. When it's approved in the United States, we are hopeful that the lutetium will be approved for pancreatic and foregut pulmonary tumors as well. And they're going to broaden it, and I think in this instance they'll use the European data of lutetium to make it a broader to make it a broader indication rather than just for the majority of the neuroendocrine tumors, which is midgut. But they are allowing the same protocol to be used in an open access, what they call expanded access. And I'm very grateful for that, because that's going to help our group, and I think Dr. Wollen's close if he doesn't already have it up. I'm going to stop there and have Dr. Sue just take it from here. And put.
I'll just tell you, I think you can tell he's the talker. And when we go to put grants together, I'm the writer. So.
And I'm docile.
Not usually. But we feel very fortunate at Iowa that we have been given the grant from the National Cancer Institute, and we are actually in the process right now of asking them to give us a little supplement to do some more work that's part of the, how many of you have heard of the moonshot, the cancer moonshot? Okay. But you haven't heard much about neuroendocrine tumors, probably with the moonshot, and I'm going to try to show you how actually the work on neuroendocrine tumors actually fits in with the moonshot. And I think one of the things that I want to leave you with, Dr. Tom also talked about a couple of times, is the fact that if you go back and look at all of the work that's been done in Europe, there are places, especially started with Dr. Baum, I think, in Germany, where they use both lutetium and yttrium. You'll go to Germany or you'll go to Switzerland now, and you will receive 1 or 2 treatments of yttrium-90 DOTATOC, and then you will receive another number of treatments with lutetium DOTATOC or dotatate. There haven't been a lot of studies done, but I am going to try to show you there have been no studies done on this combination in the United States, but there have been several in Europe. And the important thing, I think, is that every single one of these trials that has used the combination has showed that there is improvement when you have both of them. Improvement in terms of the amount of tumor kill you get, and also improvement in the time to progression. So this is the right one. If you go back to the moonshot, that's where we'll start. Can we, do I just back it up? Sorry, you have to see it backwards first. Okay. I actually remember sitting at the TV and watching the moonshot, and I learned this morning that Richard Warner was working on neuroendocrine tumors before then, and that was a long time. But here we are. Took us until 2016 to actually begin to target tumors in the way that the moonshot is trying to entice us to do. So if you look at, I pulled out from the Blue Ribbon panel, which gave 10 recommendations, 2 of them that I think are appropriate for neuroendocrine tumors. This first one on developing new imaging technologies that direct therapy directly to the tumor. Well, that's, to me, that's PRRT, and we've been doing it now for neuroendocrine tumors, at least in Europe, for 20 years, and finally it's coming to the United States. So I'm going to concentrate today on another one of the objectives of the Cancer Moonshot, which is to personalize therapy in order to be able to alleviate the toxicities that limit effectiveness. If you think about radiation therapy, you could kill any tumor if you gave it enough radiation therapy. But what limits you from doing that is, one, your ability to direct it only to the tumor, and two, the other toxicities that you receive with it. So let's look at the response, and this is a little bit repeating for you in a different way what Dr. Odorisio already told you. I want you to concentrate now on thinking about the isotopes, because this really is a radiotherapy. So think about lutetium dotatate on the top and yttrium-90 dotatate on the bottom, and let's see, the biggest difference you're going to see is one is (200 millicuries per dose for 4 doses. That's the lutetium. 120 millicuries, a little less dose, and fewer doses, because we're going to show you it's a higher energy. After that, the partial response, which means more than 50% decrease in the tumor burden, or the stability, which is the not changing, not increasing, not necessarily decreasing, is the same for both of them. More importantly, the incidence of bone marrow toxicity is the same in both of them, 1 to 3%. Some of that is reversible and some is not. That's when he talked about the myelodysplasia. That's not reversible, so we want only reversible ones. And the incidence, actually, if you, I've gone back and looked at about 10 different studies from both kinds of therapy, and if you look at the renal toxicity, it's about the same in both. I think we're getting better at being able to take care of that. So here's a little different demonstration of how these tumors work and why the difference in the isotopes is important, and also helps you think about why the two of them might be better together than either one alone. That is the penetration. If you look at yttrium-90 and you see the particle energy is 0.9 millivolts. On the other hand, the lutetium is almost 8 times less, right? 0.1. And if you look at the size or penetration, you know, if you think about that in the number of cells that could be killed by one molecule disintegrating, you see the difference in the distance it travels. And that's where the concept has come from nuclear physicists. And actually, the very first study was done by Krenning and Kwekeboom in the Netherlands. They actually did this study in a rat model of neuroendocrine tumors a long time ago, and showed, in fact, that they did work better together than either one alone. Okay, so then you say, well, can the two of them work together, and can they work better together? So the combination studies, as I mentioned before while we were waiting on the slides, have been done in several countries. They've been done both ways. One case in which the control group was people who got yttrium-90 dotatate alone, and the other group got both. And the opposite way, where people got only lutetium, and then another part of the group got lutetium plus dotatate. In all of those cases, and there have been about 3 studies of each, in all of those cases, the combination was better in terms of, number one, how much response the people got, and number 2, in how long it was until the tumor progressed again. I'm going to only have time to show you one, This is from the people at Switzerland. And if you look at the yellow line, which is those who got yttrium-90 alone, and those in the blue line who got the combination, you could see from the very beginning, and this survival time is in years. So if you look right away, you can see within 5 to 6 months a difference in the number of people who are surviving and still receiving good therapy. And all the way out to, they were able to follow out 8 years. And you can see that the people in the blue line have actually leveled off. So if you're going to extrapolate those lines, that is, imaginarily draw from time, from the end of each of those lines, you can see that there would be about a 30 to 40% difference in the length of time until people progressed. Okay, then the question, though, becomes, if you're going to use them together, are you going to increase the toxicity to the bone marrow and to the kidneys? Now, the people in Basel also looked at that, and you can see, again, we're looking at the yellow line as those who received yttrium-90 DOTATOC alone, and those who received both are in the blue line, and you do see that they had a little bit more toxicity, although if you compare that to the black line, which is all the toxicities put together, they still don't account for nearly all of the toxicities. So, going back to the moonshot, one of the biggest goals, I told you, is to personalize therapy. And I think you heard, at least I heard this morning in the question period, every person on this panel was saying how we need to personalize the therapy. And this is the way at Iowa we're trying to help personalize the therapy and why we think we need both the lutetium and the yttrium-90 together to get the optimum care. Because that will help us optimize the tumor dose. The amount of radiation that goes to the tumor will help us minimize the amount of toxicity to the bone marrow, and it will help us minimize the toxicity to the kidney. I'm going to only talk a little bit about the bone marrow toxicity. I don't have time to go into that data today, but I just want you to understand what we're talking about when we talk about toxicity. I'm sure everybody's heard about stem cells now, and we know that the bone marrow is one of the places where you have the most stem cells. The only place you have stem cells for the actual blood cells, white blood cells, red blood cells, platelets. And the number of bone marrow stem cells is actually what we're talking about when we talk about toxicity. The bone marrow cellularity is the best measure we can get of that, and that's when we actually do a bone marrow and we count the number of early cells in the bone marrow. Those decrease with age. And I'm not just talking about decreasing from the time you're 70 until the time you're 80. I'm talking about the difference in your stem cell pool between the age of 3 years and 30 years. That's the biggest drop. So already by the time we're 40 or 50, we're not considered good bone marrow donors anymore because we don't have enough bone marrow stem cells. The other biggest issue with bone marrow reserve is chemotherapy. So if you're 40 or 50 and you've had, like many of the patients who come to us for PRRT, 3 or 4 different kinds of chemotherapy, then your bone marrow has a much lower reserve, and you're more likely to have bone marrow toxicity from PRRT. And then finally, we're lucky because in neuroendocrine tumors, we do not have many patients with actual bone marrow disease. But for instance, when I treat kids with neuroblastoma, they have a lot of disease in their bone marrow. It actually, in that case, we've had kids where we gave the PRRT even though they had had previous chemotherapy, they increased their normal bone marrow because we were able to kill the tumors in the bone marrow. Okay, so if we want to optimize the radiation dose to the tumor and minimize the radiation dose to the kidneys, how can we do it? I'm going to show you how we're doing it in our trial. It's pretty involved, and I want to walk you through it. Looks pretty easy here. We quantify the yttrium-90 DOTATOC with a PET scan. Now, nobody's heard about doing a PET scan with yttrium-90. You hear about doing a PET scan with gallium, and I'll show you how that works. Then we measure, that initial one tells us how much actually gets into the kidney, and then we measure the decay over 4 more days, and that tells you how fast it's being eliminated from the kidney. And then our nuclear physicist calculates the actual amount of radiation received by the kidneys, and we adjust your doses depending on that. We can adjust it up or down. We have a maximum of how much you can get. We don't have a minimum. So, starting from the left part of the slide, we start with the gallium DOTATOC, and I want you to see the kidneys there. I'm not very good at pointing out, but you can see where there's 2 bound. You can see the gray line in the middle there of that scan is your spine. And you can see this person has a bony met in the spine, and you can see the liver, which has 3 big lesions in it. But the important thing from this is from your CT or MRI, we can measure the size of the kidney. So that is not only to tell us where the disease is, but it also is very important in determining what the size of your kidney is. Then everybody gets the first dose the same. They get 120 millicuries, no matter whether you're my size or his size. And we measure yttrium-90 has a beta emission. That's what actually kills the cells. And 98 to 99% of the activity is that beta cell. But there's a little bit less than 1% that is what we call positron decay. And positron emission tomography is what a PET scan is. So when you give 120 millicuries compared to when you give gallium and you give 3 millicuries to do a gallium PET scan, you can actually get a PET scan from this yttrium-90. We let them finish their amino acid infusion, and then we take them down immediately to the PET center. And for 30 minutes, we accumulate over that whole 30 minutes how much activity was actually in the kidney. Now, that's the first step. Then we use that as our calculation point or our starting point for how much dose the kidney got. And that point is up at the top now. And that is going to be in the red dot. That's the starting point for calculation. Now, at the same time, that same time you get that PET scan, you go, in our institution, back upstairs to another scanner, and you get a SPECT scan, which measures, you can see the other 2 of those are at 5 hours. The PET scan and a SPECT scan, which measures the decay of the actual beta energy that's in the yttrium-90. We ask the patients to come back at 24 hours, 48 hours, and 72, and you can see very nicely there how the activity in the kidney is actually decaying, and we calculate what the dose is to their actual kidney. Every single patient goes through this. Now, one of the things I want you to see is, I talked to you about, different sized people probably have different sized kidneys. And you can see 300 grams, 400 grams, up to 500 grams. So that's, you can have a 2-fold difference in the amount in the size of people's kidney pretty easily. Now, you would think that you'd get more radiation with the big kidney, but it's actually the opposite. And if you look down here, the person with the big kidney had only 0.7 milligray, and the person who had the smaller kidney got over 3 times as much dose to the kidney. So does it make sense for us to give every patient the same dose 3 times? We don't think so. And be safe. So we've only done 25 patients so far, 24, but 19 of those people were actually able to get a higher dose than we originally started out with, but more importantly, we have 5 patients in whom we needed to decrease. And it turned out they had smaller kidneys in some way or another. This can be because of the size of your kidney, or it can be because you have scarring in your kidney, or you have diabetes, or you have hypertension. We need to know how much active kidney you have. We haven't had renal toxicity to date, but you have to remember we're only about 2 years into this, so we don't have long-term results yet. So my moonshot summary in terms of PRRT is we have to think about we're delivering radiotherapy, that we're using the DOTA to take that therapy into the right cells. And it relates to the lutetium or the yttrium-90. That's what's actually killing the cells. The combinations, and there are going to be probably lots of different combinations of yttrium-90 and lutetium, are better together than either alone. And that's been shown over, and I wouldn't say over and over, but it's been shown at least 10 different studies. And personalized dosimetry, we certainly believe, will maximize the delivery to the tumor while protecting both the bone marrow and the kidney. I want to thank our tumor group. It's taken a lot of us to do all of this work. And I know we have at least 1 or 2 patients who went through these 5 days of scans for us. And I hope that those of you who have gone through this recognize that it really did help us change the amount of therapy we gave you. Thank you.